Hey everyone, it's Eric Mintel. Welcome to Eric Mintel Investigates the Interviews. Today, I've got my good friend Dr. Dean Bertram on the show today. And, he's been gracious to have me on his show on a show called Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. And Dean and I are like-minded individuals. And he's also a filmmaker, a paranormal investigator, coming to us today all the way from Wisconsin. And he's got a really, really cool project to talk about. Something in the paranormal world that is going to just excite a lot of people. And it's a story that I've never heard before, so I'm really interested to hear more about it. And also, I wanted to let you guys know that there's been a lot of really cool things going on here at the Eric Mintel Investigates headquarters. I'm sure you've probably seen, but I've also just released my very first book. It's called Eric Mintel Investigates Casebook Investigations, Stories, Encounters, and Otherworldly Contact. And it's a lot of investigations that we've encountered some things that we cannot wrap our heads around still. So it's available on Amazon, and would love for you to pick it up and give it a review. And it's an easy read. But joining me on most of these investigations is my good friend Dominic Sattel, and he's also our spirit medium as well. But let's get into the show. I want to hear all about what's going on. So let's welcome Dr. Dean Bertram. As promised, there he is. Dr. Dean Bertram, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing good now. I get to talk to you, Eric.
I know, man. This is a good thing. I know you've had me on your show, several times, and I really, really appreciate it. So I said, I got to return the favor. This has been a long time coming. I know, you and I are like very like-minded in the same things that we're like going after in life. And before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what you're doing, which there is a lot of, I always like to ask my guests, what is basically the fire in the belly that made you want to investigate the paranormal and have paranormal be part of your life?
I'll try to make it brief. It's a bit of a long story. Um, I think when I was a kid, I did have some strange, which I've spoken about on a couple of other shows, I guess the equivalent of strange bedroom visitations. And I've never been sure whether they were just my childhood psyche dealing with something, or whether it was real, or whether it was in this kind of in-between space, like the imaginal realm, which people like Henry Corbin have talked about. At any rate, I hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to that until I was older. In fact, I think I was doing my undergraduate degree, or had just finished my undergraduate degree, and I happened to see on a book sale table a book on alien abductions written by Edith Fiore,
Okay.
called Encounters. And I knew nothing about the field. I mean, I'd seen In Search Of when I was a kid, and I'd seen Close Encounters and pop culture stuff, but I hadn't been. And I also had in fairness some, kind of, strange mystery books that children have on UFOs and monsters and ghosts. But I hadn't spent a whole lot of my time thinking about this stuff. So now I'm in my, early 20s. And I picked up this book, and for whatever reason, I found it really mesmerizing. I read the whole book. And just to qualify, I don't think I am an alien abductee, but when I was reading that book, Edith Fiore, who worked in a clinical space with people who were abductees, she clearly knew how to push the right buttons in people. And so her book started, unlike most books, saying if you're reading this book and if any of it scares you, and if any of it, get your heart's beating fast, or you start to have strange memories of things that happen in your room or something. So I'm instantly thinking, maybe I was an alien abductee. Now, of course, it's a scary book. It has all these alien abduction type experiences and alien abduction type encounters. So it's the same as if you were reading Stephen King's It, you might get scared. It doesn't mean you're
Yeah.
abducted by a killer clown when you were a little
Yeah.
kid into the sewers, but it had that kind of effect. And I think a lot of alien abduction methodologies kind of deals in that way, which I think is faulty. I think there's a problem with kind of setting somebody up to think if they're disturbed, or if something's scary, or if they have any strange memories in childhood, for example, that they might be an abductee. Anyway, I think then I wasn't sure, and I really did think maybe I am one. And that kind of led me on a path of just reading every single thing I could get my hands on in the UFO space. And then eventually I'd spent so much time doing this. I was, as I said, I think it was at the end or just after I'd finished my bachelor's degree, I was working in the real world, and I thought I could go back academically and write about this stuff. Now I'm so immersed in it anyway. So
Mhm.
that's probably, I mean, short story long, really, that's what got me into got me into this space that you and I both operate in.
That's amazing. And it always boggles my mind because everybody comes into it from a different angle, and definitely from different experiences that they've had. I would like to talk to you about this new project, but here's the other thing. So you've had that experience. Did you ever kind of look into that any deeper with those memories?
Well, I mean, only insofar as I read an awful lot of the abduction literature, and then I started to read an awful lot of the skeptical literature, and I read academic works on sleep paralysis and things like that. There's a book called "The Terror That Comes in the Night" by who wrote that. I think Hufford wrote that. Anyway, it contextualizes those type of experiences within cultural beliefs of where they take place. And I never thought of those experiences when I was little, even after it would have been probably before I saw Close Encounters and ET and everything else. But I never put, one and one together and got three. I never assumed that it was alien abduction until I read that book. So I think my way of dealing with it when it came back to haunt me as a young adult was academically. It was just reading as much material as I could. I didn't go out and stuff. And you know what? In a way, I'm glad I didn't go out and get hypnotically regressed, because people, I think, who are in the hypnotic space legitimately, or in the use of hypnosis for therapeutical reasons.
Right.
I know when I have a regular guest on the show, Ed Schultz, who's a very insightful human being, and he says, and it's true, I've heard it from so many other people, it's dangerous to try to recover memories, particularly memories of things like, alien abduction or, ritual abuse or something, because we're so loaded with what these tropes are like. And if a therapist who has a dog in the fight, the way Edith Fiore does, who in that book also said she believed in visiting extraterrestrials since she'd read Donald Kehoe's book back in the early 1950s, if you're already invested in a belief system, and if the therapist's invested in that belief system as well, and you can confabulate this tale. So I'm glad I didn't go that therapeutic route, because I think a lot of people who had genuine, let's say, anomalous experiences or something phenomenological happen to them, I think when they attach all of these kind of cultural tropes and ideas to that experience, they can kind of reshape it, and it can then begin to fit the expectation, which is little gray men from outer space came and took you away and experimented on you.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it becomes this, belief system, like you said, over the years, and it just becomes integrated, and that becomes their mantra, over time. So it's good that you didn't go into that direction. But what fascinates me though is that a lot of people are having these experiences, and it's like with so many people having them, it's you can't really discount, what's been going on. Is it a psychological thing? Is it some other type of reality? So that's what's fascinating to me. And the other thing is too, these people are genuinely frightened of what they're going through, and I'm sure that that happened with you as well. And I mean, it's something that kind of like it's like a marker, a moment in your life that you never forget. And I know that certain things paranormal wise, I always say it too, that I don't care who it is, someone has had some kind of paranormal experience in their life, something that they can't explain. So it's just fascinating to me. But tell me what's going on, man. I mean, you always have something going on. I know you're a radio show. You're on Talking Weird. You're doing a ton of things. What's the latest thing that you've got going on here, without spilling the beans per se?
Well, I think what I'm most interested in, I do Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network live every week, 9 p.m. Central. And I run a couple of film festivals, including Midwest Weird Fest and a Night of Horror International Film Festival out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So that takes a lot of my time as well. But my passion project, probably for almost going on 2 years now, has been a feature documentary titled "The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers." I actually stole that title from John Keel, who wrote a piece about Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver in 14 Times back in the early 1980s. And Keel's hypothesis was there is this editor that some of your listeners might not be familiar with, because he has been forgotten in many ways, who edited a magazine called Amazing Stories throughout the 30s into the mid to late into the late 1940s, early 50s. And Ray Palmer essentially received a letter from somebody called Richard Shaver, and Richard Shaver said that he believed he discovered this secret root language where the letters of the alphabet that we know in English actually had meaning. So each letter had an actual meaning, and then you could dissect words by working out how the word was spelled, and you could work out what, the meaning of the word was. And Palmer published that letter in Amazing Stories, and he had an incredible response from readers. Some of them saying this is just nonsense, and some of them saying, oh, I can work out what this word means now, and this word means now. Anyway, Richard Shaver continued to correspond with the editor, Raymond Palmer, because Richard Shaver was the person who wrote the letter. And eventually, Richard Shaver sent Raymond Palmer this 10,000-word document called A Warning to Future Man. And what it essentially set up this kind of cosmology about the history of the world, where way back in antediluvial times, according to Shaver, there had been these ancient races, and because the sun was starting to poison the earth, first they went underground into the caverns and made this extensive underground world. But as the poison from the sun got worse, most of them fled to the stars into deep space where they were far away from the sun's poison. However, they left behind some people that Shaver called the abandoned Darrow, and some of them mutated into these horrible, hideous creatures called the Darrow, which, using the language of Shaver, stood for detrimental robot. It didn't mean they were like mechanical robots. It just meant they had one kind of motive in life, and that was to cause destruction and to hurt and to maim people. And they had been left behind all this incredible ancient technology from the people who'd fled to the stars. So in the caverns underground, they had this machinery they could point at the surface world and cause plane crashes and car accidents. They could send voices into people's heads. They could make people do horrible things. Now, Palmer, having had this kind of treatise on the history of the world, changed the story. He essentially rewrote the whole thing into an actual fictional narrative called I Remember Lemuria, which became a 30,000-word really novelette, which he published in the March 1945 issue of Amazing Stories. And he sold it as, this is racial memory that Richard Shaver has, because racial memories was a popular kind of pseudoscientific idea at the time. That, as much as the letter had encouraged readers to become excited, this thing blew up. There were people who said this is nonsense, and there were people who just adored it and wrote in their own letters saying, we've had experiences with these beings in the caverns, we've heard the voices. And so a magazine that was dying when Palmer became the editor originally, it was probably down to 10, 20, 30,000 circulation. Palmer had already grown that to 135 by the time that he published the first Shaver story. But by the peak of the Shaver stories, he got to a 250,000, like 250,000 circulation, which was massive for anything in this space. So it was an incredibly popular story with most readers, but the science fiction community were annoyed because they said, this is just nonsensical. None of this stuff happened and it's not real science fiction. So there was this incredible struggle in the sci-fi community to try to cancel the Shaver mystery. So that was kind of the setup for, anyway, long story short, John Keel said that all of these stories about spacefaring civilizations and about aliens because these Darrow abducted people to the underground world as well. And this kind of started to set up a lot of UFO belief, which would come out in 1947 when Kenneth Arnold first had his sighting on June 24 near Mount Rainier of the 9 strange flying discs. Now, there's a couple of wonderful crossovers, and one of them is that by June 1947, the Shaver mystery was kind of at its apex. The June 1947 issue of Amazing Stories, in fact, was just titled the All Shaver Mystery issue. Now, Amazing Stories already for a couple of years had been dedicated to the Shaver mystery. Like, that had been the ongoing theme. It had multiple of the cover art, multiple stories, whole sections of increasing letters from readers, but this issue was just the Shaver mystery and things related to the Shaver mystery, and a piece in there in that June 1947 issue. So this is the issue which would have been on the newsstands when Kenneth Arnold had his sighting, was a piece by the famous Fortean Vincent Gaddis, and it was a piece called Visitors from the Void. Now, this is before people were using the term flying saucers to describe these discs or strange crafts in the sky. So Gaddis didn't have that term really to use yet. But that whole piece is essentially Vincent Gaddis describing what were essentially flying saucers and strange things in the sky throughout history and suggesting we were being visited from elsewhere. So Amazing Stories was setting up this belief system. So when the saucer stuff erupted, people didn't instantly go, it's alien, remember? A lot of people went, oh, it might be Soviet secret weapons or our own secret weapons or misidentified things. But there was already this growing belief system out of the readers of Amazing and out of other people in kind of the occult and New Age realms at the time, thinking this stuff might be flying saucers. So basically Palmer and Shaver had set up the tone for everything that was come forward. And they've been all but forgotten. I mean, people who are hardcore historians in this space and people who are really into it know the background. But your average person who gets into UFOs because they read the front page of the New York Times story in 2017 about Tic Tacs and, secret, Pentagon defense programs about UFOs, they tend to think of it only within this context of the X-Files type mythology. We have that the US government knows the secrets and, have crash sources, laying in Area 51 and they're back engineering them or whatever. But so much of the actual belief system or the lore of UFO belief was created by Palmer and Shaver. And then, of course, Palmer went on to then hire Kenneth Arnold, the very first witness, to go and start writing pieces for him in Fate magazine, which was the next magazine Ray Palmer launched after Amazing. So that's kind of a wrap up of what I've been focusing on for the last 2 years.
How did you originally come across this story? Because this is something that I've really never heard of before. And then you're working on a documentary. Could we say that too? Could we
Sure. Yeah, that's the feature documentary is The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and on the circuit at the moment, the festival circuit, I'm screening a film called The Shaver Mystery, which is essentially a segment from the bigger documentary, which is just about that Shaver story I told before.
Right. Okay.
But so I'm still working on the feature. It's well over half shot now. It should be shot out by the end of the summer. But as far as how I came across it, when I was doing my PhD on UFO belief, which is what I ended up doing, that's when I became, I suppose, conscious of the importance of Palmer and Shaver. And this is back in like the late 90s when to the early 2000s when I was writing this. So I talked about them in my dissertation, and I agreed with John Keel, who said Palmer was the man who invented flying saucers, and Donald Menzel, probably the most famous skeptic in the history of opposition to UFO belief. Donald Menzel had said the same thing in one of his books back in the day, that Palmer had done all of this, laid all the groundwork. The FBI, even when they went to interview Shaver and Palmer after the Maury Island incident and after the early flying saucer flap stuff, their internal memos say, we think this is all of this UFO stuff has pretty much been invented by Shaver and Palmer to sell magazines. Now, that's a little skeptical because I don't think they just invented it to sell magazines, but they certainly set the zeitgeist for what came forward. So that I was already cognizant of it. And what made me want to do the documentary is when another show I used to do called Mysterious Library, it doesn't run anymore, but it also used to be on the Untold Radio Network with my good friend and co-host Jason McLean. We used to talk about different books and different articles and, what you might find in a mysterious library, right, every week. And one week I said, hey, let's do the Shaver mystery. This will be fun. So now I'm living in Wisconsin. When I wrote this dissertation, I was in Sydney, Australia. So I think I knew Palmer had been born in Milwaukee, and then Amazing Stories was run out of Chicago. But living here, I never really thought about any kind of connection. But when I started to look into the Shaver mystery again and read the old publications again and listen to, there's an old Long John Nebel show. Long John Nebel was like the Art Bell or the Coast to Coast in the 1950s and 60s, right? And he had Palmer and Shaver on, and he's saying, and he says, in the ad break or the return from the ad break, we have with us from Amherst, Wisconsin, Mr. Raymond Palmer. And I thought, how far can Amherst be from me? And I still don't know the geography perfectly. I've only been here for a decade, so you only find out so much. So I plugged Amherst, Wisconsin into, Google Maps, and it was like a back road commute from my house. It's the neighboring county. And I'm like, I could do it. And then I found out Shaver lived there as well, which I didn't know then. They both moved to the area as neighbors. That's how close they were. And I went, I can do a documentary about these guys. They lived in my backyard. So that's what started the kind of the furor about the Shaver mystery 2 years ago.
Isn't it amazing, like what you put out to the universe will bring to you? It's amazing, man. That's awesome. And you answered my question. I was going to say, that's not a Wisconsin accent. Where, you're originally from Sydney, Australia. Yeah. How long have you been here now, by the way?
I immigrated here in 2014. So it's about a decade now.
Nice. But having these guys in your backyard now, did you get a chance? Obviously, you talked to them. What was that like?
Well, they're both deceased. Actually, I wish I could have talked to them. Palmer, Shaver died
so
first.
This was after the fact. So you found out that they were in your backyard, but you didn't get a chance to talk to them at that point.
No, because I was a little kid when they both died. Palmer died in 77 and Shaver died in 75. That's why I feel incredibly close to them both now, because I spent so much time looking at them. I've spoken, obviously, to people who knew them since. I've spoken at some length with Raymond Palmer's son, who still lives in Amherst, Raymond B. Palmer. So he obviously has all kinds of stories and all kinds of memorabilia, and is a fascinating and very kind, very warm human being. Shaver moved from Amherst, and that's a whole another story why he left. It's a fascinating story into itself, and moved to Summit, Arkansas. And I haven't been to Summit yet. It'll be the final big trip of the documentary. I've already done a few. The last big trip for the documentary will be to Summit, Arkansas
And you've been
next month.
and you've been to Maury Island.
I was there for the 77th anniversary. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. What was that like to be on site there for something that happened in history that is still
It
hasn't
was
been explained?
it was incredible. And of course it was Palmer who, the only reason we know about the Maury Island incident is because of Raymond Palmer. People will tell you the whole Maury Island story, and they won't even mention Ray Palmer's name. But what happened, for just as a quick brush up for those who don't know, there was an individual called Harold Dahl. He was out in Puget Sound, which is between the mainland and between Maury Island. Maury Island's off the coast, and he was salvaging lumber, and then these 6 discs, donut-shaped items, donut-shaped objects, actually, because they had holes in the middle, came over his boat, and one of them was in trouble and was kind of rocking back and forth in the air, and then it started to spew out all of this material, which damaged his boat and fell all over the shoreline and killed his dog and injured his son. Anyway, long story short, that material gets sent to Ray Palmer. Nobody's talking about this at all. This happened about a couple of days, I think it was June 21, so 3 days before June 24, where Arnold saw
Right.
the sources over Mount Rainier, which you can see Mount Rainier from Maury Island. It's very close, like it's all the same geography. Anyway, so everybody would have forgotten this story, but Raymond Palmer hires Kenneth Arnold, the guy who saw the sources, a couple of days later, and sends him to Maury Island to investigate it. And then it becomes this, crazy story, which we can't get into full details here, but there's men in black warning witnesses to stop talking about it. And eventually the 2 Air Force officers who Kenneth Arnold calls in because it's too big a mystery for him, the Air Force officers get given some more of the slag by Dahl and Chrisman. Fred Chrisman's a man of mystery who was also Harold Dahl's boss.
Yep.
And when they're flying back to base, that plane crashes,
Yeah.
and both of the Air Force officers die. So this massive story, which is almost the proto Roswell, it happened before Roswell, is only known about because Palmer paid Arnold to investigate. Arnold called the Air Force officers in, and then Palmer beat that drum for the rest of his life and published books with Arnold about it called The Coming of the Sources, ran stories about it in Fate magazine and his other magazines. But again, the man who invented flying saucers is termed that for a reason, because the idea of men in black comes out of that story. The idea of saucer debris, which is, taken away by the military, and there's all these chicanery and conspiracies, which even kills 2 U.S. Air Force officers to hold on or to get rid of it. All of the kind of stuff we think of X-Files or UFO belief now comes really out of Maury Island. And Maury Island is only remembered and only went the direction it did because of Ray Palmer.
Amazing. I mean, the whole thing is amazing. And just before Roswell and then to Kenneth Arnold, and there's definitely a connection there for sure. So I can't wait to see this documentary. Now, when do you project it to be out there?
Well, the Shaver Mystery, the 14-minute segment from it, is already doing the festival circuit. We've already played a number of festivals. We won Best Documentary at Jersey Devil Film Festival, which was a lot of fun. We have a few upcoming which we've been accepted into, but they haven't announced yet, so I have to be quiet. We have a screening in a wonderful art space called In the Pine Studios in Stevens Point on Friday, April 16. For anybody in the kind of center of the Wisconsin area, they can go and if they follow me, in fact, on Facebook, or if they follow the movie on Facebook, if you just type theshavermystery.com into your web browser, that will take you straight to the Facebook page where I have the upcoming screenings of the Shaver Mystery.
Put that link right there.
Thank you so much. And but the actual feature, like I said, it's almost in the can. I should have shot it out by the early fall, and then by the time I've finished the edit and tweaked it, I imagine by this time next year I'll be submitting it to festivals, so it should be on the festival circuit hopefully in about a year's time, and then from then distribution hopefully.
Love it. Any speaking engagements, books, anything like that coming up?
No, if I can, I get to the screenings. Like I'll be at the In the Pines Studios screening on August 16th to introduce into Q&A the Shaver Mystery.
Cool.
But I do, in fact, I do have one speaking engagement, but it hasn't been announced yet, so I won't announce
Okay.
that yet. But I'm not really at a whole lot of paranormal conventions. Film's really my thing, so you're more likely to find me at a film festival than at a Paracon.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Dean, as always, man, I mean, it's just, it's something else that I've learned from you today. So it's like amazing. There's so many different layers, and already the show's over. I mean, it's like that half hour goes by really quick, but fascinating. We're going to make sure that people get the link that they could see what's going on and check you out. And we'll put the link to your show, to your podcast, so people could listen in. And as always, man, you're always a gentleman, and I really appreciate your time today. And keep me posted, man. Keep me posted on what's going on.
I sure will, and I'm so grateful that you had me on the show. And I always watch your Eric Mintel Investigates. It's so much fun.
We're always getting into something.
That's for sure.
Well, listen, thank you so much, man. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. We've got a lot more guests coming up, so thank you so much. Have a great night.